thank you. It's an honor to be here and to be the guest of my good friend, Professor Ralph Hancock. I just succeeded the first test, which was to climb the platform. And I did it. Actually, my work on Islam and the Muslim countries has been a direct consequence of 9/11. After 9/11, suddenly the whole Western world discovered that we had a problem, to say the least, in our relationship with the Muslim world. And in the United States, by millions, people started to buy the Quran and to read the Quran, which is extremely difficult, by the way, and to try to understand, why and what this happened. I wanted to react to that kind of reaction, overreaction, by spending a couple of years actually studying Islam and traveling to all Muslim countries, and to try to convey a different view of the Muslim world, so that we better understand them, and in a way it's maybe vain, but to help them rediscover some of their traditions which they had forgotten because of dictatorships which forbid any kind of debate in their own country. And the first observation and remark we have to make about Islam is extraordinary diversity. Islam is altogether a religion and a civilization. It's very far from being unified because Islam is based on the notion that any Muslim has a direct relationship with God through the Quran. Therefore, in the Muslim world, there is no central authority, and nobody is in a position except among the Shia, which are a minority, mostly centered on Iran, but in the Sunni world, which represent 90% of the Muslim people, no one is in a position to say, this is true, this is wrong. Any individual has the right, based on his own understanding and his own relationship with God, to say this is right and this is wrong. And this liberty of interpretation is accentuated, as in a way increased, by the very complexity of the book. The book has been dictated, according to the Muslim creed, has been dictated by God directly to the Prophet. But it's a book which not only is difficult to read, but it's a book which is, in a way, filled with contradictions, because it reflects several periods in the life of the Prophet. Just to give you a very simple example of what I mean, you all know the word jihad. Okay? Jihad is a word which appears twice in the Quran. So some would say jihad means holy war. So in the name of jihad, we have to fight the non-Muslim people and to impose Islam on them. This can be deducted from the first part of the Quran. But in the second part of the Quran, jihad reappears with a completely different meaning. Jihad means the struggle within yourself against the devil. So jihad, according to your version of Islam, can be to fight the other or to fight the evil and the devil in yourself. And therefore, this kind of ambiguity can be used and misused by anyone, Muslim and non-Muslim. And I give this example because jihad, everybody knows this name, and jihadists and so on, but Muslims themselves do have extraordinary divergences and contradiction on the interpretation of nearly any word in the Quran. And no one is in a position, is a kind of a hierarchical position to say, no, this is the right meaning. Nobody can say that. every Muslim can decide for himself. So this is the first difficulty to understand Islam and to understand its complexity and diversity. In reality, we are not dealing, and they are not dealing with Islam. We are dealing with Muslims. Okay? Islam is what Muslims do with the book of Revelation. And there is not Islam as such, like an abstract object somewhere, an abstract cultural object somewhere. No, Islam is based on the behavior of the Muslims. And the other source of the complexity comes from the fact that there is no pure Islam which is not intertwined or closely connected with the local culture in which it operates. I mean, you probably know, because in America you have a lot of the people from Muslim origins, that a Muslim from Bangladesh is not exactly a Muslim from Saudi Arabia, and a Muslim from Morocco is not exactly a Muslim from Indonesia. Okay? They do connect because they all consider that there is only one God, and God expressed himself directly through the Quran and spoke to Muhammad, the Prophet. This is what they have in common. And beyond that, you have a huge diversity. Some Muslims, for example, believe in saints, local saints, and would go and pray on the tomb of saints. This is very common in Africa, for example. It's completely forbidden in Saudi Arabia. Okay, the cult of saints is forbidden. And some would believe in certain prophets, and some would not. And some consider that their prayer can be only local in certain mosques, but not in other mosques. So Islam basically is local. It's local, it has cultural roots and huge diversity, and the diversity and the differences are sometimes much stronger than what they have in common. As a proof of what I say, if you look at the history, the Muslim history, since, let's say, the 8th century of our era, Muslim history is the history of wars, not that much with the Western and Christian world, mostly between themselves. And this started from the very beginning and still going on today. I mean, as you know, in Iraq, in Syria today, basically Muslims are fighting other Muslims. One of the fiercest wars in the recent year was the war between Iran and Iraq. If you follow day-to-day events in Africa, right now you have a very harsh war in Mali between two versions of Islam, between some radical Muslims, jihadists, and some more moderate Muslims who are more Sufi. Sufi is a kind of a Muslim Islam where you like to sing and to drink, and other just forbid drinking and singing. So the diversity is extreme, and this is why I prefer always to talk about Muslims and not Islam. Having said that, about beyond diversity, there is something new which appeared 20 years ago and which is directly connected to 9/11. Many Muslims around the world have been uprooted by globalization, migration, left their country, went to live in Europe and in the United States, North America, and they lost contact with their familiar practice, lost contact with their mosque, lost contact with their family. And they felt as if they had to recreate some kind of a community, but community without any roots. And they found a way through the web, in large part, by recreating something which is completely new and never existed before, which is kind of a global Islam, which is completely cut from its cultural origins, and which is extremely simplified. And these global Muslims represent a minority. It's new. Once again, they relate more to the web than they relate to Bangladesh or Indonesia. Their vision and interpretation of Islam is extremely simple, and they can be very quiet and civilized people, or they can be extremely aggressive. So it is inside this new global Islam that you find some of the terrorist groups which attack the United States and other countries. So to summarize, keep in mind diversity, complexity, multiple interpretation, the fact that it's basically a strongly individualistic religion without leaders, and that recently you have this new kind of globalized Islam. Just one detail that you must have in mind. Do not make the confusion between the Arab world and the Muslim world. The Arabs represent approximately 20% of the Muslim world. The largest Muslim countries in the world are in Asia. It's India. You have more than 100 million Muslims in India. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia. Those are the largest Muslim countries. And then the Arab world, which is very divided, as you know, and Iran, which is in itself a category. I mean, the problem of the Iranian, I mean, in the 8th century, is that Iran was an empire and wanted to remain an empire and become Muslim. So they kind of invented it, if I may say so, a specific branch of Islam, which is Shia Islam, which is basically a Persian way of being Persian, remaining Persian, and becoming Muslim. So that's about diversity. Now, the second item I want to cover is about the Quran. Because so much has been said about this book, and so much of the so-called problems of the Muslim countries, which for most of them are poor and undemocratic, to what extent this can be connected to the religion as such, and to the origin and to the principles which you can find in the Quran. As I said, it's a book which is not easy to read and even more difficult to understand because of the contradiction, and I mentioned one of them, but there are many, of course. But as we are wondering if there is any coherence or contradiction between the Quran, Islam, and, let's say, free market economy or capitalism. One of the most remarkable facts in the Quran is that, and in Islam in general, it's the only religion which has been founded by a businessman. I don't know of any other religion which has been created by a businessman. And Muhammad was in business, and his wife was extremely wealthy, was also a businesswoman. So it's a religion of traders, basically, and it's a religion where the both main actors were heavily involved in trade and commerce throughout the Middle East. And also, it is maybe the only religion which celebrates economic success and wealth. It's good to be wealthy, according to the Quran. So it's exactly the contrary of the Christian revelation, where you better be poor to reach paradise. In the Muslim world, you better be rich to get to paradise. And therefore, basically, you would expect that the Muslim people would be more wealthy than we are because their religion is a celebration of economic success. And why it is not, I will come back to that in a moment. So there is nothing ethical about poverty in Islam. And there is nothing unethical about being rich. As a compensation, each Muslim is supposed to give, and this will not surprise you, a certain percentage of his income or wealth every year not to his church, but to his mosque. And this is not a tithe, it's called the zakat. It's 3%. much cheaper. But no, it's not. It's not tax deductible, so it's more or less the same. So each Muslim is supposed to give 3% of his revenues, financial income, and so on. Usually, is expected, and they mostly do that still today. They give that to charities, which are called foundations, which are organized exactly like the American foundations, and which go back to the 8th century of our era. So it's good to be rich, and you give 3% to a charitable foundation. This is the basic principle. Some economists pretend that the Muslim world remained poor because of the prohibition of interest rate. And it's true that interest rate is prohibited by the Quran, but it's also prohibited by earlier Christian texts. And it did not prevent the Christian countries to become rich. And actually, the prohibition of the interest rate of money lending, this has been, this solution has been found since the 10th century. You don't pay an interest rate, but the person to whom you lend the money will share the profit with you. So basically, it's worked the same way as an interest rate. Today, you may have heard about Islamic banking. If you leave your money with an Islamic bank, you're saving with an Islamic bank, you don't get an interest rate as you would in a Western Christian bank, but you have a share of the profit, and the consequence is exactly the same. So the argument that interest rate prohibition is an obstacle to economic development just doesn't work. There may be, according to certain interpretation, there may be one reason which was an obstacle on the road to economic development. I quote it, I'm not absolutely convinced that it's true or not true, but there is in the Quran very strong words against blasphemy. The problem is, what is blasphemy? But you can be killed, condemned to die for blasphemy. The problem is blasphemy not being defined. It has created a fear of innovation in the discussion within the Muslim world. I mean, if I say this, if I do that, this is new, maybe it will be considered as blasphemy. So this blasphemy, maybe, if you look at the Quran as a reason for the poverty of the Muslim world today, this would be the only theological reason, which could be, to a certain extent, an obstacle on the road to intellectual, cultural, and economic development. I quote it because there are a lot of books about that. I'm not absolutely convinced that it's decisive, but it certainly deserves to be noted. So, to summarize about the Quran, to look into the Quran, as many people do, to try to understand the Muslim world, why some of them became violent, why some of them became terrorists, why most of the Muslim countries are poor, why most of the Muslim countries are not democracy. I think the Quran is certainly not a sufficient explanation. It's better to know what it is about, but to consider, as many people still do in the West, that everything is wrong because the Quran is wrong, this is just not coherent. So we have to still go on with our research and try to understand why today, if you look at the map of the world, you will see easily that most of the Muslim countries are poor, and on average, we have today approximately on Earth 1 billion Muslims. On average, the Muslims are poorer than the rest of the people on Earth. And this is compensated by some very wealthy people in Saudi Arabia or Qatar, but in a mass of 1 billion people, it doesn't. So why are they poor? I think the right answer is not why the right question is not why are they poor. The question is why are we rich? Because until the 14th century, if you look at the Mediterranean region, for example, where Christian and Muslim nations were living together and having more or less the same activities, I mean, the level of the quality of life and economic level was quite similar. And the Muslim and the Arabs were a little bit above the average income of the Western Christian people. And there has been a disruption starting in the 14th century. The disruption is that the Muslims remained poor and the Christian societies became rich. So the question is why we became rich and they didn't follow up. We became rich because in countries like Italy, Belgium, France, England, the Netherlands, we were able to invent some new mechanism to become rich, like the banking system, like shareholding companies, and we were able to create abstract economic system which were not based on religion and not based on family connection. And this is why we started our development. In the case of the Muslim world, family connection and religion remain central. And they were not able to follow up the road of the Christian because they were not able to invent the same kind of mechanism. To give you a specific example, the first shareholding companies, private shareholding companies in the Arab world did not appear before the end of the 19th century. So we in the West, having shareholding companies, we could start huge economic adventures. In the Arab world, in the Muslim world in general, family connection were more important, but the family is restricted. So you cannot build a very large company only with your brothers, sisters, and cousins. You can build a large company if you can bring together thousands of shareholders. This is the way the big corporations started in the West and explain why we became wealthy countries and they did not. So to summarize and to make my point clear, the Muslims didn't become poor, we became rich, and not for religious reasons, not for cultural reasons, but because in the Muslim world, family connection remained vital and central, and not in our case. It's because of our individualism that we were able to create this new capitalist mechanism. Now, why didn't they catch up in the 19th century? In the 19th century, the Muslims discovered that a huge gap was appearing and increasing between the Western world and themselves. The two countries which understood first that something was happening was Turkey and Egypt. And let's focus on Egypt, okay? Egypt, as Ralph Hancock mentioned, in one of my books, I tell the biography of this remarkable young Muslim from Egypt, Rifa. Rifa was a young man who came to Paris in 1831, exactly at the same time that Tocqueville went to the United States. And they had the same age. So it's very interesting that each of them was looking for the future. Tocqueville was looking for the future, which would be democracy in the United States, and Rifa was looking for the future in France, which at that time was the most wealthy country in Europe. And Rifa, after 7 years in Paris, went back to Egypt, and he introduced in Egypt what's been called the Renaissance movement in the Arab world. Well, to make things simple, he created schools for girls, he created the first universities, printing press, had all the French books translated into Arabic, created a modern administration, and they created the first industries. He became kind of the prime minister for Egypt during 20 years. And for most of the observers in the 19th century, it seemed evident that the Arab world would follow the same road as the Western world. There was nothing at that time in our perception which would prevent the Muslim world from becoming democratic and wealthy. And if you look at what was written, let's say, until the 1930s, the dominant discourse in the West and also within these countries regarding the Muslim world, that there was nothing wrong with Islam, and Islam was perceived as perfectly compatible with democracy and economic development. And for example, coming back to Rifa in Egypt in the 1840s, I mean, the men and women in Egypt were treated equally, and the women were allowed not to carry a veil on their face, because Rifa noted that in the Quran it was not mentioned, and he said that girls should be educated as boys because any good Muslim should be able to read the Quran, boys or girls. So the very notion of equality between men and women was not a debate. So everything seemed fine. And actually, the disruption, the real disruption, and which explained the difficulties of the current Muslim world, cannot be explained by an ancient past, cannot be explained by reading the Quran. We better look at what happened in the 20th century. We try to find explanation rooted in very old texts and very old tradition. We better find an explanation of the current situation by looking at the recent history. The real problem in the Muslim world has been the colonization by the West and the fact that decolonization is not over. I will elaborate on that. As you know, all Muslim countries, without any exception, have been colonized by European nations, without any exception. And this colonization has been very harsh. Tradition has been destroyed, institutions have been destroyed and not replaced. When decolonization started in the 1950s, of course, the Muslim world reacted with violence. There were wars against the British, against the Italians in Libya, against the French in North Africa. So this created an hostility to everything that the West represented, because the West was the colonizer. And what did we represent, basically? Capitalism and democracy. So capitalism and democracy were to be rejected because they were related with the period of colonization. So the rejection of capitalism, let's still focus on Egypt, but it's true for nearly all the Muslim world. You had in Egypt or in Syria or in Iraq, you had a very strong tradition of private entrepreneurship. After the decolonization war, or after the new independence of Egypt in 1952, the first decision by the Nasser government, or in 1962 by the Algerian government, was to destroy all kinds of private property, to confiscate the land, to confiscate the enterprises, and to expel or to kill the entrepreneurs, and to replace the free market system by socialism, because the Soviet Union did support the colonized Muslims against the West for evident strategic reasons. So the Soviets replaced us in a way. And they did impose or propose an economic system which at that time in the 50s and 60s seemed as very efficient. And all Arab countries, nearly all Muslim countries, because it went as far as Bangladesh and Indonesia, they turned to the socialist economic system. And the real disaster started in the 1960s. Same in politics. If you consider Syria, which is very much in the news, or Iraq, or Egypt, or Lebanon, in the 1930s, for example, even during the colonization, you had good universities, free media, a vibrant cultural life, election, political parties. After the decolonization occurred, all this was destroyed and replaced by military dictatorship. Why? Because the military were at the forefront of the decolonization war. So they were the new heroes. And they never left. And in most of these countries, they are still there, except in Egypt, but back to Egypt and Tunisia in 1 second. So, in a nutshell, the destruction of the economy in most of Muslim countries and the destruction of any kind of intellectual freedom, academic freedom, and political freedom, the destruction of the political parties, this has nothing to do with the Quran, this has nothing to do with Islam, it's completely connected with the 20th century history. By the way, to show you what the influence of the 20th century in Europe has been on the Muslim world, as you know, now there are, since a year, there are many elections after the so-called Arab Spring in Tunisia, in Egypt, mostly also in Jordan, and you have noticed that these elections usually have been won by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a political party and a charity organization, but interestingly enough, did you ever ask yourself, and following what model? The Muslim Brotherhood was inspired by the fascist movements in Europe in the 1930s. Why? Because the fascist movement in the 1930s in Europe appeared as kind of a revival movement, Renaissance movement, anti-bourgeois, and very modern. So the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood was Egyptian, El-Banna. He just copied, he Xerox, the status of the fascist party in Italy. And they still have the same status of the fascist party in Italy. So the Muslim Brotherhood doesn't connect with the ancient history of Egypt. This has nothing to do with the Quran, nothing to do with the Arab history and tradition. It's a branch of a European tradition which has been imported because perceived as being efficient. So once again, you cannot understand the current world in these countries if you don't know the history of the 20th century colonization and decolonization. Now, as I mentioned the Arab Spring, what should we expect right now, and what is the future, if we can say anything about the future for the Muslim world? Many Muslim countries are making huge progress toward democracy and kind of economic prosperity. If you start from the east, you see Indonesia has become a quite transparent democracy with clean elections and free media and good university and a vibrant cultural and artistic debate. And the growth rate in Indonesia right now is around 7%, not far from China. Bangladesh, a bit more unstable, but also a very large Muslim country, quite a vibrant democracy, not perfect, but nowhere, and with a very high growth rate, also around 6-7% a year. If you get closer, let's look at Turkey. Turkey has a growth rate now which is around 8%, one of the highest in the world, and it's a democracy, and as you know, they want to join the European Union, and I'm among the public intellectuals in France who are very much in favor of a large Muslim country as far as it is democratic and developing, joining the European Union. Now, if we focus on the Arab world, and mostly on the Arab Spring, was it good or bad? I think my position is that by supporting dictators like Mubarak in Egypt or Ben Ali in Tunisia, we really played with the devil. These dictators were hated by their own people. So we supported people, we supported dictators which prohibited free debate. I was never authorized to speak in Egypt, but this is a small detail. I can go to Egypt now only since the Arab Spring started. There was no free debate, there was no free media, there were no free election, and the country was extremely poor and corrupted. And is the situation better now? Well, after what has been considered a free and clean election, the new president from the Muslim Brotherhood seems like quite a decent person. He has been in office since 4 months by now. Nobody can say that he made any major mistake. No violence, no more political prisoners, and the economy is not improving because the military are still controlling nearly everything. So there is much to do toward privatization of the Egyptian economy. But no doubt, Egypt is a very imperfect society, very imperfect country, but no Egyptian want to go back to the former regime. Same for Tunisia, same for Morocco, where the regime is now much more relaxed and tolerant, same in Jordan. You still have many dictatorships, like Algeria, for example. But basically, I think the Arab Spring has brought back what people were requesting. You know, the motto of the revolution was, "We want our dignity back," and they got their dignity back. And I can tell you that in countries where it was not allowed to open your mouth, now everybody's talking, and you will never stop them from talking. Okay? Maybe they talk too much and they should act a little bit, but to talk is a good start. So I think the Arab Spring is a gigantic source of hope, and we must hope that countries which are not yet have been reached by the Arab Spring, like Syria, will be able someday, I'm sure they will, to also have free election and a liberated economy. So those were more like introductory remarks on such a vast subject, and we decided to keep some 20 minutes or so for questions and answers. Thank you.
Who wants to step forward then with the first question?
Question will be accepted only if you speak with a French accent. I'll try.
Ou en français aussi.
En français aussi, but then I must translate. So who wants to start? You want to start? Go ahead.
I have a question. So,
Can you speak loudly because we have no mic?
yeah. So you said that the Muslims claim that God gave inspiration to Muhammad for the Quran. I feel like I've run in the past that he claimed that the angel Gabriel appeared to him many times and like he gave him inspiration for the Quran. What do you think about that?
No, it's not inspiration for the Quran. If you are Muslim, you consider that the Quran are God's words. And the Quran has been dictated directly to Muhammad. Okay? Muhammad wrote under the dictation of God. And so it's very different from the Bible, for example. Okay? The Bible has not been dictated by God to the Hebrew prophets, but the Quran is supposedly the authentic words of God. Yes?
So I'm from Kosovo, and obviously it's known as an Islamic country. It's with 90% of the population being Muslim. My question is, you mentioned how most of the Arabic countries have this hostility against the Western European and America. and most of the Arabic countries have not recognized independence of Kosovo yet. Do you think that is because that America and Western European countries helped Kosovo during the war, and that is creating like this conflict?
I don't think so. As you are from Kosovo, it's a good example of the diversity of Islam. Because between a Kosovar Muslim and a Muslim from Nigeria, I mean, there are more differences than similarities. And so many Arab countries consider that Muslims from Kosovo or Albania are not true Muslims. Okay? And this is very common, as you know. The neighbor is not the true Muslim, I am the true Muslim. So I think this must be the main reason why Kosovo didn't get any support, and also for the reason that you mentioned, that Kosovo is considered as kind of a creation of the Western powers, and so they don't want to be involved in that. But the good thing about Kosovo, regarding all other nations within Yugoslavia, that sooner or later they will become part of the European Union. There is no debate about that. So these kind of problems, which are a consequence of World War II, will be solved thanks of the European Union. And by the way, as I said that I supported the Turks within the European Union, I think it's very important that European Union would have some Muslim countries, and Kosovo, Albania, and maybe Turkey someday. Yes?
Kind of on the train of Turkey, at the time of the Arab Spring, Erdogan kind of seemed to go and visit a lot of the Arab Spring countries.
Yes.
What role do you see Turkey kind of playing in helping Muslim world kind of move? Turkey's, of course, a very secular country, moving towards kind of that, political paradigm of Islam and secular political situation.
Turkey is now is regarded by most Muslim countries in the region as a very positive experience. I wouldn't say as a model, because as the Turks decolonize the whole region, the Arabs do not want Turkey to recreate kind of an Ottoman Empire. So, but what they like about Turkey, that Turkey is showing that Islam, a modern Islam, a moderate Islam, democracy, rule of law, far from being perfect, but kind of rule of law and high economic growth with private entrepreneurship, all this can be combined. So Turkey is certainly the experience which is today for countries like Egypt the main source of inspiration. The only problem is that the Turks and the Turk leaders sometimes want to go too far and want to give advice, and then the Egyptian and the Syrian, and Tunisian say, okay, no, we know you, and you colonized us a century, we want you to be back here. So that's the limit of Turkish influence. But as a positive experience, yes, no doubt. Yes,
You are optimistic about the so-called Arab Spring. Some call it an Islamist winter. Given that you are aware of the fascist roots of the Muslim Brotherhood, why are you then so optimistic? You have even mentioned that those roots are still present in the current Muslim Brotherhood. It seems we've had elections, we've had democratic elections, but without democratic values. Could you respond to that?
Sure. And I said they had fascist roots historically, which doesn't mean that you can say today that the Muslim Brotherhood is a fascist party. I mean, they were at the very beginning. I just wanted to explain that the roots of the Muslim Brotherhood were not that ancient, but were really very much connected with European history. And I'm neither pessimistic nor optimistic. I just look at what's going on there, and I see that everybody, especially in the West, was terrified by the perspective of the Muslim Brotherhood seizing power. And the Western countries, the United States, French government supported the Mubarak dictatorship because we didn't want the Muslim Brotherhood. And we knew that if we didn't support Mubarak, we would have the Muslim Brotherhood. So we have them right now. Okay? So we have to judge them on facts. And so when they, of course, you can always say they have some kind of long-term hidden project, but so far they behave, I mean, the Egyptian president or the Tunisian president, they behave as regular Democrat guys, and they did beat the opposition. And I think the opposition, one of the reasons why they beat the opposition is that the opposition was promoting socialist economic ideas. And the Muslim Brotherhood, they won, not only because they were the main force in opposition since years and years, and they were very active in charities and very well respected and considered as not corrupted, but also they have a very free market agenda which is perceived as good for the economy. The mistake of the democratic parties in Egypt and in Tunisia, they ran on an economic socialist platform. And I think they were beaten also for this reason. Yes?
I wonder, for what reasons does the Muslim world have anti-American sentiment?
Well, the United States, the American government always supported the dictators there. And this is why. I mean, there's no other explanation. The Americans supported Mubarak and Ben Ali and the Saudi king and so on and on and on. So the United States were caught into that contradiction with a discourse promoting democratic values and supporting the worst dictators in the region. And until 1 year ago, Bashar al-Assad was considered as a reformist by the American president. So how do you expect the Arab people to love America after this kind of diplomacy, which is going on since more than 70 years? And the United States were very slow to intervene and support the democratic movement during the Arab Spring. They accepted the result, but very reluctantly. Yes, was that?
You talk about the economic development that occurred in the Western world when we started to develop large corporations. And you said that in the Muslim world, family connections remained more efficient. Do you have any ideas about why those were different?
Okay, usually it's explained by the rules of marriages in Europe, as opposed to the rule of marriage in the Near East. In Western Europe, we followed since century the Roman individual choice of your spouse. It's an individual decision, okay? And we inherited the Roman law, which is based on individual rights. And so it's because we are individuals that to build large corporation, you have to associate with people beyond your family. And in the Arab world, for cultural reason, the weddings were always decided by the family, the parents, and so on. And the tradition was not based on individual rights, but on community rights. So it has less to do with religion than with local culture. The Eastern or Middle Eastern culture is more based on bloodline and community, and the European culture is not based on bloodline and community, but based on individual right. We are Roman and they are not. Yes, sir?
So we're talking about the United States and our involvement in the Middle East and kind of how our failure to support democracies and support dictators. Now that they're switching over to democracies, are we going to be able to have good relations with these countries? Do you see a potential where we can actually be allies again with true democracies?
Yes, well, I think there is a strong desire among most of the Arab people to have a close connection with the United States. Well, there are some very pragmatic reasons, like the best universities in the Middle East are the American University in Cairo and the American University in Beirut. And so there are a lot of the new elite, in a way, the younger elite is being educated in English, and you could listen to that when you followed the Arab Spring on television, that they were speaking a perfect English because they were students at the American University in Cairo. So there is a desire to have good relationship with the United States. They also know that the United States is a decisive market for them and source of investment, and that it would be extremely difficult to develop the economy without a close relationship with the United States. And also, many of these new regimes are threatened by radical Islamist movements. And so I mentioned Mali, we see what's going on in Syria. So I think that little by little you will see a closer relationship for purely strategic reasons between new governments like the Egyptian government and the United States, because there is a threat out there of radical Muslims trying to take over this country. So for objective and sentimental reason, I think the ties, the relationship will be slowly rebuilt, but it will take some years before the people forget the support to the Mubarak regime, for example. Yes?
How real is the danger of those radical Muslim movements like actually hijacking Arab Spring, creating sort of a situation that arose in Iran after the 79 revolution?
Oh, I think the threat is minimal because the most extremist radical movements are very small minorities. But of course, there are small minorities like Al-Qaeda is a very small group of people, but with a huge capacity to disrupt any country. And I'm afraid that we'll have to live with them for a while, and because there is no possibility to really eradicate like that, these movements. But to see some of these violent radical movements taking over a whole country, I don't see, at least in the Arab world, I don't see any possibility for that. One of the key elements, though, will be the economic development. I mean, it's very important. You have to remember that the revolution in Egypt started because young people were unemployed. Okay, they had a college degree, and they went out of the university, and there were no jobs available, and that was the beginning of the revolt. So what these countries need is really to start to grow, and they have not yet started because the revolution is, it's halfway through. As I said, in Egypt and to a certain extent in Tunisia and certainly in Algeria, the military do control and do free the economy. So the next step, that this democratic leader should be able to expel the military out of the economic domain and let the entrepreneur do their job and develop these countries. If there is no economic development, the situation will become very shaky.
Our hour is just about spent. Would you like to take one more question?
Yeah, one
maybe?
last. Okay, sir.
During the recent conflict about the video about the Prophet Muhammad, I was listening to what the leaders of Arab countries were saying and kind of thought leaders in the Middle East, and it seemed to me like they were saying mostly that this kind of thing shouldn't happen because it's hate speech. Like this kind of video shouldn't happen more than they were condemning any kind of violence that might have happened because of it. And it seemed to me like this was kind of like a thing from Islam, like like you're talking about blasphemy, how they are against blasphemy. Do you see that as kind of a problem for free speech in the Middle East?
Yeah, it is a problem, but I see the problem as rooted in recent history, and when no free speech is allowed for a very long period of time, for more than a century, the very notion that you can speak your mind and start criticizing or even making fun of the religion, this is completely new. I mean, democracy is a learning process. I mean, they're on the first step of the learning curve, and the reaction to this video, I mean, is been very, very different according to Muslim countries. For example, India is a country with the largest Muslim population. You had no reaction in India against this video, because in the US and everybody's making fun at everybody on a daily basis. So it's a question of intellectual practice. But in countries which have been closed tightly during years and years, I mean, they have to learn and they will.
Professor Sorman, thank you for an excellent introduction to the question of Islam and freedom today, and please join me again in thanking Monsieur Sorman.